Why would a genetics lab call me about a sample from 1989 that I didn't even remember giving? My twin brother had just inherited our parents' entire $90 million fortune while I was living in a motel, but that phone call changed the definition of the word family. The scientist told me the results were impossible, but when I saw the files, I realized I wasn't the one who had been erased. My brother was. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Mark. If you saw me walking down the street, you wouldn't look twice. I have that kind of face. Average, forgettable, the kind you see on a tired commuter on the subway or a man waiting quietly in line at the pharmacy. I'm a nurse, which suits me. My job is to be calm, to be steady, and to clean up the messes that other people leave behind. My brother Paul is different. He is my identical twin, but nobody ever mistakes us for each other once they hear us speak. Paul takes up space. When he walks into a room, the air seems to move out of his way. He is louder, sharper, and hungrier. He works in high-frequency trading, moving millions of dollars around with a few keystrokes, and he wears suits that cost more than I make in 3 months. For 42 years, the dynamic was simple. Paul was the star, and I was the orbit. Paul was the alpha, the winner, the favorite. I was the beta, the helper, the safety net. I accepted this. I thought it was just the natural order of things, like gravity. I never argued when our parents praised Paul's promotions and ignored my double shifts. I never complained when they framed his magazine features on the living room wall and put my birthday cards in a drawer, but I didn't realize how much they truly despised my quietness until they were both gone. The week after our father died, Mom had passed 6 months earlier, we gathered for the funeral. It was a cold, gray Tuesday. Paul arrived in a black luxury sedan with tinted windows. He stepped out looking like he was attending a board meeting, checking his watch before he even looked at the casket. I had been at the hospice every day for the last 2 years, changing sheets, managing morphine drips, and holding hands. Paul had visited twice. During the service, Paul insisted on giving the eulogy alone. He stood at the podium, gripping the wood with manicured hands, and spoke for 20 minutes. He didn't talk about Dad's love for fishing or Mom's garden. He talked about legacy. He told the congregation that our father was a lion, a conqueror of industry, and that the greatest honor of a son was to carry that fire forward. He spoke about strength and ambition. He used the word I 43 times. I counted. He said that he, Paul, was the living embodiment of our parents' dream. He didn't mention me once. I sat in the front row, staring at the back of my brother's expensive jacket, feeling like a ghost at my own family's funeral. 2 days later, we met at the office of Mr. Henderson, the family's estate attorney. The office smelled of old leather and furniture polish. Mr. Henderson was a good man, a rigid man who had known us since we were children. He looked uncomfortable. He kept adjusting his glasses and shuffling the papers on his mahogany desk, refusing to make eye contact with me. Paul sat with his legs crossed, scrolling through emails on his phone. He looked bored. I sat with my hands folded in my lap, just wanting it to be over so I could go home to my wife, Sarah. "Let's get this over with, Henderson," Paul said without looking up. "I have a flight to catch." Mr. Henderson cleared his throat. He opened the heavy folder. He began to read the last will and testament of our parents. It started with the usual legal language, listing the assets. The portfolio was massive. Real estate, stocks, bonds, offshore accounts. The total valuation was just over $90 million. Then there was the lake house, a sprawling estate on the water that had been in the family for 3 generations. It was the crown jewel. Then came the distribution. "To my son Paul," Henderson read, his voice tight, "I leave the entirety of the financial estate, the investment portfolio, the collection of vintage automobiles, and the lake house property. Paul, you are the strength of this line. You are the one who can hold the weight." I waited for the and. I waited for the part where they remembered the son who drove them to chemotherapy, the son who fixed the roof, the son who was there. Mr. Henderson paused. He took a sip of water. "And to my son Mark," he read softly, "I leave my best wishes, and permission to enter the lake house garage one time to collect any sentimental effects he can carry in a single box, provided they have no significant market value." The room went silent. The air conditioning hummed. I felt a physical blow to my chest, like I had been punched. It wasn't about the money. I never expected millions. But best wishes? It was a deliberate slap in the face. It was a final, legal declaration that I didn't matter. Paul laughed. It was a short, sharp bark of a laugh. He looked at me, a wide grin spreading across his face. He told me that he wasn't surprised. He said Mom and Dad had always been clear about who had the potential and who was just taking up space. He said he was glad they finally made it official. I looked at Mr. Henderson. I asked him if this was a mistake. I asked if there was an earlier version of the will. Mr. Henderson shook his head slowly. He told me the will was updated 3 months ago, right before Dad lost his ability to speak. He told me the language was ironclad. There was nothing he could do. We walked out into the parking lot together. The sun was too bright. My head was spinning. I reached into my pocket for my car keys. I drove a sturdy SUV that my father had leased through the family company years ago. I used it to drive them to all their appointments. Paul stepped in front of me. He held out his hand, palm up. He told me he would need those keys. I looked at him, confused. I asked him what he meant. He explained that the car was technically a company asset. Since the company and all its assets now belonged to him, the car was his. He said he didn't want to deal with the insurance liability of me driving it. He told me to empty my personal things out of the glove box. I stood there in the parking lot of the law firm, realizing he was serious. He wasn't doing this because he needed the car. He was doing it because he could. He wanted to see me walk. I didn't fight him. I didn't scream. I just opened the door, took out my sunglasses and a phone charger, and dropped the keys into his hand. He told me I was doing the right thing. He said it was time for me to learn to stand on my own 2 feet without Daddy's money. Then he got into his luxury sedan and drove away, leaving me standing on the asphalt. I took a taxi home. It cost me $60, which was money I shouldn't have been spending, but I couldn't face the bus. I lived in a modest 2-bedroom apartment with Sarah. We had been married for 6 years. Sarah was beautiful, younger than me, and lately very distant. She had always liked the idea of the Harris family name more than she liked the reality of living on a nurse's salary. She had been patient, I think, waiting for the inheritance. She always assumed that when my parents passed, we would be wealthy. When I unlocked the front door, the apartment was quiet. Too quiet. I walked into the bedroom. Sarah was there. She had 2 large suitcases open on the bed. The closet doors were flung wide and her side was empty. She didn't look up when I came in. She continued folding a silk blouse, placing it neatly into the case. I asked her what she was doing. I asked her if she was going on a trip. She stopped folding. She turned to look at me and her eyes were cold. There was no anger in them, just a flat, bored disappointment. She told me she had already heard the news. I asked her how. She said Paul had texted her. He had sent a group message to the inner circle, and obviously I wasn't in it. She knew everything. She knew about the $90 million, she knew about the lake house, and she knew about the box. She told me she couldn't do this anymore. She said she had wasted 6 years waiting for me to man up, to demand what was mine, to show some spine. She said watching me get rolled over by my brother was embarrassing. I told her that I loved her. I told her we could make it work. I told her I still had my job, and we had savings. She laughed, a sound that reminded me terrifyingly of Paul. She told me that savings wasn't a life. She said she refused to be the wife of the unlucky twin. She said she deserved to be near the winner. She zipped up the suitcase. She told me she was going to stay at a hotel for a few days, and then she was going to the lake house. She said Paul had offered her the guest cottage while she sorted her head out. I stood in the doorway and watched her leave. I didn't try to stop her. What was the point? If she could leave me 5 hours after I lost my parents and my inheritance, she was never really mine to begin with. I sat down on the floor of the empty living room. The apartment felt massive and hollow. The silence pressed in on my ears. I was 42 years old. I had no parents, no wife, no car, and no family. I had been erased. I was just a footnote in Paul's biography. I closed my eyes and leaned my head back against the wall. I felt a strange sense of calm settling over me. It wasn't peace, it was the numbness of total defeat. I thought about just going to sleep right there on the rug. Then my phone buzzed in my pocket. It wasn't a text, it was a notification from the banking app. I pulled it out and looked at the screen. The harsh blue light hurt my eyes. Alert. Joint checking account ending in 4490 has been closed. Balance of $18,400 transferred to external account. Sarah hadn't just left. She had cleaned me out. I stared at the phone until the screen went black. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a doormat who would just lie there and take it. And for tonight, they were right. But as I sat in the dark, I realized that when you have nothing left to lose, you also have nothing left to fear. The phone buzzed again. I ignored it. I didn't know it yet, but that second buzz wasn't from the bank. It was a voicemail that would change everything. But that night, I just let it ring. The Days Inn on Route 9 isn't the kind of place you stay because you want to. You stay there because they take cash, they don't ask questions, and the weekly rate is lower than the deposit on a new apartment. After Sarah cleaned out the joint account, I had to make a choice. fight a legal battle I couldn't afford, or liquidate what little I had left and survive. I sold the furniture she didn't take, pawned my watch, and moved into room 114. The room smelled of stale cigarette smoke and industrial cleaner. My entire life was packed into 2 duffel bags in the corner. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at the textured ceiling, and for the first time in years, I thought about the hospital. Not the hospital where I worked, but the one from 1989. I was 7 years old. While Paul was outside playing Little League and winning trophies, I was in a sterile white room at St. Jude's, hooked up to machines that beeped in the night, acute lymphoblastic leukemia. I was the sick twin, the weak twin. I remember the day of the biopsy clearly. It's a memory that sits in your bones. The doctor was a giant man with cold hands. He needed a bone marrow sample. My mother stood by the window, looking out at the parking lot. I was crying, terrified of the needle. "Please, Mark, stop that noise," she said, not turning around. "You're embarrassing yourself. Look at your father. He's missing a meeting for this." Dad was sitting in the plastic chair in the corner, reading a newspaper. He didn't look up. He didn't come over to hold my hand. He just turned the page, the sound of the paper snapping like a whip in the quiet room. "It's an expensive procedure, Mark," Mom added, checking her watch. "We're spending thousands of dollars to fix you. The least you can do is be brave like Paul would be." They took the sample. It felt like a drill boring into my hip. I screamed. Mom sighed. Dad kept reading. That was the dynamic. I was the investment that wasn't paying off. I was the broken appliance they were trying to repair, while Paul was the shiny new model on the showroom floor. They fixed me. The chemotherapy worked, the remission held, but the debt remained. I spent the rest of my life trying to pay them back for saving me. I became a nurse to understand the sickness. I took care of them in their old age to balance the ledger. But as I sat in that motel room, I realized the ledger would never be balanced. To them, I was always just a deficit. The next morning, I tried to reclaim the one thing they had left me. I drove my rental car, a beat-up sedan that rattled when it went over 40, to the lake house. I didn't want the money, I didn't want the cars. I just wanted the box Dad had promised me in the will. Sentimental effects. I wanted the photo albums. I wanted the old reel of film from the one fishing trip where Dad actually smiled at me. I pulled up to the iron gates. They were new. Paul must have had them installed immediately. There was a keypad and a camera mounted on a stone pillar. I pressed the buzzer. "Delivery?" A voice crackled. It wasn't family. It was security. "No," I said, leaning out the window. "It's Mark, Paul's brother. I'm here to pick up my things." There was a long silence. Then the camera lens whirred, zooming in on my face. "I have strict instructions, sir," the voice came back, devoid of emotion. "Mr. Harris is not to be disturbed. No unauthorized visitors." "I'm not a visitor," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm his brother. The will grants me access to the garage." "Mr. Harris said that if you came by, I was to tell you to contact his assistant to schedule a supervised appointment. The next available slot is in 3 weeks." "3 weeks?" I gripped the steering wheel. "I just need 10 minutes. Please clear the driveway, sir, or I will have to call the sheriff. You are trespassing." The gate stayed shut. Through the iron bars, I could see the long, winding driveway lined with oak trees. It was the house I grew up in, the house I had painted 2 summers ago because Dad was too cheap to hire a crew. Now I was a trespasser. I reversed the car and drove away. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a cold, hard rage that was starting to solidify in my gut. I needed to blow off steam. I drove to the gym. It was a high-end club in the city, one of the few luxuries I had kept for myself over the years. I had paid the annual fee in January, so at least they couldn't kick me out yet. I changed into my workout gear and hit the floor. I put my headphones in, blasting white noise to drown out the world, and started lifting. Deadlifts. Heavy. The pain in my muscles felt good. It was honest pain, unlike the mess in my head. I was midway through a set when I felt the atmosphere in the room change. You know how it feels when the energy shifts? People were looking. I set the bar down and looked toward the free weight section. Paul was there. Of course he was. He was wearing brand new gear, expensive compression shirts that showed off his physique. He was loud, laughing at something his spotter said, high-fiving a guy I knew from high school. And then I saw the spotter. It was Sarah. She was wearing a workout set I had bought her for her birthday. She was standing over the bench press, her hands hovering near the bar as Paul repped out. She was laughing, too. That bright, tinkling laugh she used to save for me when I made a bad dad joke. She touched Paul's arm. It was a casual, intimate gesture, a touch that said, "I am with him now." I stood there, frozen. It had been less than a week. Paul sat up on the bench. He wiped sweat from his forehead and scanned the room, basking in the attention. His eyes locked onto mine. He didn't look surprised. He didn't look guilty. He smiled. It was a predator's smile, wide, toothy, and devoid of warmth. He nudged Sarah and pointed at me. Sarah turned. She saw me standing there in my old stained t-shirt, sweating and pale. Her expression tightened. She didn't wave. She didn't come over to explain. She just turned her back to me and handed Paul his water bottle. I was invisible. I was the ghost again. I didn't storm over there. I didn't cause a scene. That's what they expected. They expected the weak twin to cry or the jealous twin to fight. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. I racked my weights, wiped down my bar, and walked out. As I sat in the locker room, changing back into my street clothes, I checked my phone. I wanted to block them both. I wanted to delete the social media apps that linked me to their shining, victorious lives. But before I could, a notification popped up. It was a video Paul had just posted to his story. It was time-stamped 10 minutes ago, from the gym floor. I clicked it. The camera was shaky, selfie style. Paul's face filled the frame, glistening with sweat. "Grinding," Paul said to the camera. "That's the difference, guys. Some people wait for handouts. Some people wait for daddy's money to save them. But real alphas, we take what's ours." He panned the camera to the background. I was in the shot, blurry, hunched over the deadlift bar in the distance. "Don't be like the help," Paul sneered, zooming in slightly on my figure. "Don't be a bedpan changer. Be the guy who owns the hospital. Levels to this game." Sarah's laugh echoed in the background of the video. "Stop it, Paul," she said, but she sounded delighted. I turned the phone off. My hands were steady now. The rage had cooled into something else, something sharper, clarity. He wasn't just content with taking the money. He wanted to destroy my dignity. He wanted to erase the only thing I had left, my pride in my work, my identity as a man who helped people. He wanted to rewrite history so that I was always a failure, and he was always a god. I went back to the motel. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, listening to the trucks rumble past on the highway. I felt entirely hollowed out. No wife, no brother, no parents, no home. The red light on the motel room phone was blinking. I ignored it. Then my cell phone buzzed. It wasn't a text this time. It was a voicemail notification. I had missed a call while I was in the shower. The number was strange. An 800 number. I almost deleted it. I assumed it was a bill collector or a scammer. But something made me listen. Maybe I just needed to hear a human voice that wasn't mocking me. I put the phone to my ear. "Mr. Harris," a woman's voice said. She sounded professional, older, calm. "My name is Dr. Harris. I'm calling from the National Genetics Registry in Maryland. We've been trying to reach you." I frowned. I had never been to Maryland. "We are currently digitizing old tissue samples for a longitudinal study on childhood leukemia survivors." The voice continued. "We have a sample of yours on file from St. Jude's Hospital, dated November 14th, 1989. I closed my eyes. The needle, the pain. Mom looking out the window. "Mr. Harris," the doctor's voice dropped an octave, becoming serious. "We ran a routine cross-check on the sample against family markers in our database to update our records. A flag came up, a red flag." There was a pause on the recording. "The DNA in your sample, it doesn't match the profile of the parents listed on your intake forms. Specifically, there is a statistical impossibility regarding your twin brother. It's complicated. But we need you to come in. We need to verify who you are." The message ended. I sat there in the silence of room 114. "Doesn't match." I replayed the message, then I replayed it again. Paul had spent the last week telling the world that I wasn't a real Harris, that I didn't belong, that I was weak stock. I looked at the phone. I looked at the date, 1989. I grabbed a pen and a napkin from the nightstand and wrote down the callback number. For the first time since the funeral, I didn't feel weak. I felt a strange electric hum in my blood. I wasn't the one who had been erased. Not yet. The drive to Maryland took 4 hours. I spent the entire time gripping the steering wheel of my rental car, my knuckles white, my mind racing through every worst-case scenario. When a geneticist calls you after 30 years, you don't think about family trees. You think about cancer. I was convinced the leukemia had come back, or that I had passed some ticking time bomb down to a child I didn't have. The National Genetics Registry was housed in a nondescript glass building that looked like every other office park in the suburbs. It was sterile, quiet, and smelled of antiseptic, a smell that always made my stomach turn. I checked in at the front desk. A security guard scanned my ID, his eyes lingering on my face like he was looking for a match in a catalog. "Dr. Harris is expecting you on the 3rd floor," he said. Dr. Eris was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and hair pulled back in a severe bun. Her office was small, dominated by 3 large computer monitors glowing with complex charts. She didn't waste time with small talk. She offered me water, which I declined, and then she turned her chair to face me. "Thank you for coming, Mr. Harris," she said. Her voice was gentle, the kind of voice doctors use when the news is bad. "I know this is unusual, but as I mentioned on the phone, we are conducting a longitudinal study on pediatric leukemia survivors from the late 80s. We're looking at long-term genetic stability." "Is it the cancer?" I asked, my voice tight. "Is it back?" "No," she said quickly. "No, Mark. Your health markers are excellent. This isn't about your health. It's about your history." She clicked a mouse. 2 large columns of data appeared on the center screen. They looked like ladders with missing rungs, colored in blue and red. To verify our samples, we run cross-checks against known biological relatives. It helps us map mutations. In your file from 1989, from St. Jude's, we also had access to the screening data for your brother, Paul. He was tested as a potential bone marrow donor for you, correct? I nodded. He wasn't a match. They said our HLAs were too different, even for twins. It happens. It does happen, Dr. Eris said. But with identical twins, it's rare. With fraternal twins, it's common. But Mark, I need you to look at this. She pointed to the left column. This is your profile. We compared it against the samples provided by your parents for the donor screening. You share 50% of your DNA with your mother, Judith Harris, and you share 49.9% of your DNA with your father, William Harris. That is a perfect parent-child match. She pointed to the right column. This is the profile for Paul. I squinted at the screen. The blue and red bars were different. Paul shares 50% of his DNA with your mother, Dr. Eris said. She paused, looking at me to make sure I was listening. But he shares 0% with William Harris. The room went silent. The hum of the computer fan seemed to get louder. I don't understand, I said. We're twins. We were born on the same day, within 10 minutes of each other. It is a phenomenon called heteropaternal superfecundation, Dr. Eris said. She spoke clinically, but I could see the sympathy in her eyes. It is extremely rare in humans, but it happens. 2 eggs are released during the same cycle. Each egg is fertilized by a sperm from a different male within a short window of time. You and Paul are not twins in the traditional sense. You are half-siblings who happen to share a womb. I sat back in the chair. The leather creaked. So, I whispered, Paul isn't Dad's son? Biologically, no, she said. We ran the markers against our wider database to see if we could identify the second father. We found a partial familial match in the region, a localized cluster associated with a specific family name, but no direct individual in the system, but we can say with 100% certainty that William Harris was not his father. She turned the screen off. The reflection of my own face stared back at me. I wanted to tell you in person, she said softly, because I saw the file notes. I saw that your brother was the primary donor during the initial phases, and there were notes about family dynamics. She knew, or she guessed. She saw the weak twin and the strong twin on paper and realized the cosmic joke of it all. I stood up. I felt lightheaded. For 42 years, Paul had strutted around claiming to be the alpha. He had claimed the Harris legacy. He had stood at the pulpit at the funeral and talked about bloodlines and genetic superiority. He had called me a mistake. He had told me I was lucky to even carry the name, but I was the only one who carried the name. Paul wasn't the lion. He was the cuckoo bird in the nest. My mother had stepped out on my father, probably with one of the tennis pros or club members she used to flirt with, and gotten pregnant. And by some 1,000,000,000 to 1 chance, she had gotten pregnant by Dad at the same time, and they never knew. Or maybe Mom knew. Maybe that's why she loved Paul more. He was the exciting secret, the piece of the wildlife she wanted, while I was just the boring, dutiful son of her boring, dutiful husband. Can I have this? I asked, gesturing to the file. I can give you the raw data report, Dr. Eris said. It's your medical information. It belongs to you. She printed it out. It was 10 pages of dense charts and numbers, but the summary on the last page was clear as day. Subject A, Mark Harris. Paternal match confirmed. Subject B, Paul Harris. Paternal exclusion. I walked out of the building into the bright Maryland sunshine. I sat in my rental car and just laughed. I laughed until my ribs hurt. I laughed until I was crying. Everything Paul owned, the money, the cars, the house, the company, it all came from a trust established by William Harris, a trust for his heirs. I wiped my eyes. The sadness was gone. The humiliation was gone. In its place was a cold, hard clarity. I wasn't the beta anymore. I was the nuclear option. I didn't drive back to the motel immediately. Instead, I drove to a diner about 10 miles away. It was a greasy spoon with red vinyl booths and a waitress who looked like she'd seen it all. I ordered a black coffee and pulled out my phone. I dialed Mr. Henderson's private number. Not the office line where the secretaries listened, the cell phone number he had given me years ago when Dad had his first stroke. He answered on the second ring. "Mark, is everything all right?" "Hello, Mr. Henderson," I said. My voice was steady. "I need to see you." "Mark, I'm in the middle of closing the estate transfer. If this is about the car—" "It's not about the car," I cut him off. "And it's not about the money. Not exactly. I need to meet you, tonight, not at the office." "I can't do that," he said, sounding tired. "Paul is my client now, Mark. It's a conflict of interest for me to be meeting with you privately." "You were Dad's lawyer first," I said. "For 30 years. You wrote the trust." "Yes, but—" "Mr. Henderson," I said, leaning into the phone, "I have something you need to see, something that affects the validity of the entire probate. If you sign off on that transfer to Paul without seeing this, you will be committing malpractice, and you will be liable." There was a long silence on the other end. Henderson was a cautious man. He feared liability more than he feared God. "Where?" he asked. "The diner on 4th and Main," I said. "Come alone, and bring a copy of the trust's preamble, specifically the section on biological issue." I hung up before he could argue. He arrived 40 minutes later. He was wearing a trench coat over his suit, looking around the diner like he expected to be ambushed. He slid into the booth opposite me. He looked older than he had at the funeral. Tired. "This is highly irregular, Mark," he said, keeping his voice low. "If Paul finds out I'm here—" "Paul is going to be the least of your problems," I said. I didn't say anything else. I just reached into my bag and pulled out the manila envelope Dr. Aris had given me. I slid it across the sticky table. Henderson looked at it. He looked at me, then he opened it. He put on his reading glasses. He scanned the first page, confused. Then he flipped to the summary. He read it once. He stopped. He read it again. His face went pale. He looked up at me, his mouth slightly open. Is this verified?" he whispered. "National Genetics Registry," I said, "based on the bone marrow samples from 1989. You can call Dr. Aris yourself. The number is on the letterhead." Henderson took off his glasses. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. "My God, William never knew?" "I don't think so," I said. "But you tell me. You wrote the will. You wrote the family trust." "The trust," Henderson muttered, staring at the coffee stain on the table. "The trust was established in 1995. It protects the assets from outside parties. It defines beneficiaries explicitly." "Does it say, 'my sons Paul and Mark'?" I asked. "In the preamble, yes," Henderson said. "But the defining clause, the clause regarding the bloodline—" He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a thick document bound in blue paper. He flipped to page 12. His finger traced the lines. "Here," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "For the purpose of this trust, a beneficiary is defined as a biological child of William James Harris. In the event of any dispute regarding lineage, confirmed DNA evidence shall be the sole determinant. Assets are to be held only by direct biological issue." He looked up at me. The realization hit him. "Paul isn't a beneficiary," Henderson said. "He's a stranger." "He's not a stranger," I said calmly. "He's my half-brother, but he's not William Harris's son, and he's not the heir to the Harris estate." Henderson looked at the DNA report again. "Mark, do you realize what this means? If this holds up, Paul gets nothing. The house, the money, the cars. It all reverts to the sole biological heir." "I know," I said. Henderson looked terrified. "Paul has already started liquidating accounts. He's spending money like water. If we file this—" "We aren't going to file it yet," I said. Henderson blinked. "What?" "If we file it now, he'll fight it. He'll hide the money. He'll burn the house down out of spite," I said. I leaned forward. "We need to do this the right way, the way that makes sure he can't wiggle out of it." "What do you want to do?" "I want you to prepare an ex parte motion," I said, using a term I'd learned from watching legal dramas, hoping I was using it right. "A freezing order, but don't serve it yet. Get it signed by a judge, ready to execute. I want everything locked down the second I give the signal." "And when is the signal?" Henderson asked. My phone buzzed on the table. It was a notification from Instagram. Sarah had tagged me in a photo. It was a picture of a gold-embossed invitation. Paul's Kingdom launch party. Saturday at the lake house. New era. No losers allowed. I turned the phone around so Henderson could see it. Saturday, I said. He's throwing a party to celebrate his empire. I think it's only fair that I attend. Henderson looked at the invitation, then back at the DNA results. He slowly closed the folder. For the first time, he didn't look at me with pity. He looked at me with respect and a little bit of fear. I'll start drafting the motion tonight, Henderson said. Good, I said. And Henderson? Don't tell him. Let him enjoy his week. I took a sip of my black coffee. It was bitter, but it tasted better than anything I had ever verified. I wasn't just going to get my inheritance back. I was going to get the truth, and the truth was going to hurt. Mr. Henderson wiped his forehead with a handkerchief. We were still in the diner booth, the cold coffee sitting between us like a pool of black oil. The diner was empty except for a truck driver at the counter, but Henderson leaned in close, whispering as if the salt shakers were listening. I've read the preamble 3 times, Mark, he said, his voice shaking. I remember drafting this. Your father came to me in 2005. He was agitated. 2005, I said. That was the year Paul got his first job on Wall Street, the year I started at the hospital. Yes. William was proud of Paul's job, on the surface, but privately, he was obsessed with the idea of outsiders. He kept talking about how the family fortune had to stay in the blood. I thought he was just being old-fashioned. I thought he was worried about you or Paul marrying the wrong women. Henderson tapped the blue document. But look at the wording here in Article 4. In the event of any doubt, the trustee shall prioritize biological lineage over legal presumption. He insisted on that phrase. Legal presumption. That's the key. Legally, Paul is his son because he was born in wedlock. But this clause, it overrides the presumption if there is scientific proof. I looked at the paper. I remembered 2005. I closed my eyes and the memory washed over me. I was in Dad's study. It was a dark room, filled with the smell of pipe tobacco and old paper. I had gone in to tell him I had passed my nursing board exams. I was proud. I wanted him to say, "Good job." Dad was sitting at his massive oak desk, staring at 2 photographs. One was of Paul, winning a tennis trophy. The other was of me, standing awkwardly at a family barbecue. Nursing, Dad had said, not looking up. It's honest work, Mark. Service work. I like it, Dad, I had said. He turned the photo of Paul face down. It was a small movement, but I saw it. He looked at me then. Really looked at me. His eyes were gray, just like mine. His nose had the same slight bump on the bridge, just like mine. You have a quiet way about you, Mark, he said. You don't demand attention. Sometimes I wonder where Paul gets his noise. It certainly isn't from me. He had opened a drawer and slid a file inside, probably this very trust document. Then he looked at me with a strange expression. It wasn't love, exactly. It was recognition. Blood tells, Mark, he had muttered. In the end, blood always tells. I snapped back to the present. The diner lights hummed. He knew, I said to Henderson. Deep down, he knew Paul didn't belong to him. He just couldn't prove it, or he was too proud to admit his wife had cheated. Well, you have the proof now, Henderson said. He put the documents back into his briefcase. I will draft the motion for an emergency injunction. We go to Judge Miller. He's a strict textualist. If I show him the DNA results and the trust clause, he'll sign the order to freeze the estate immediately. When? I asked. I can have it on his desk tomorrow morning, Henderson said. We can stop Paul by noon. No, I said. Henderson blinked. No? Mark, every hour we wait, Paul is spending thousands of dollars. He's already ordered a new Porsche. He's moving cash into accounts I can barely track. Let him spend it, I said. If we stop him tomorrow, it's just a legal dispute. It's a paperwork error. He can spin it. He can say he didn't know. He doesn't know, Henderson argued. Exactly. I want him to fully commit, I said. I felt a coldness in my chest that scared me a little. I want him to stand up in front of everyone and declare himself the king. I want him to be at the absolute height of his arrogance when the floor drops out. Henderson looked at me warily. You want to do it at the party? Saturday, I said. File the motion Friday afternoon, right before the courts close. But ask the sheriff to delay service of the papers until Saturday evening. Tell them it's to avoid a hostile confrontation at the residence. Henderson sighed. He took off his glasses and cleaned them. It's risky, Mark, but it's legal. You're the client. If you want to let him dig the hole deeper, that's your prerogative. Draft it, I said, and make sure the sheriff brings backup. The next 2 days were a blur of quiet preparation. I stayed in the motel room, organizing the evidence. I printed the DNA charts on transparencies. I scanned the text messages Paul had sent me over the years. The insults, the mockery. I wasn't going to use them in court, but I kept them as fuel. On Thursday afternoon, I needed to see it for myself. I needed to see what I was fighting for. I drove the rental car out to the lake. I parked a quarter-mile down the road in a patch of woods where we used to hide our bikes as kids, and walked through the tree line until I could see the estate. The noise hit me first. The sound of diesel engines and breaking glass. I crouched behind a line of hedges and looked at the house. It was chaos. There were 3 large construction trucks parked on the front lawn. The grass, which Dad had paid a landscaping crew a fortune to maintain, was churned into mud. Scaffolding was going up around the main chimney, but it was the garden that broke my heart. My mother had a rose garden on the south side of the house. It was her pride and joy. Even if she hadn't been perfect, even if she had lied to Dad, she loved those flowers. Dad had kept them perfectly pruning for years after she died as a tribute to her. Now, a yellow excavator was tearing them out. I watched as the metal claw ripped through the trellis. The white roses, now brown and dead from winter, were crushed into the dirt. Paul was standing on the porch, wearing a white hard hat that looked ridiculous on him. He was holding a blueprint and shouting at the foreman. He pointed to the spot where the roses used to be. "Wider!" I heard him yell. "The helipad needs to clear the roof line. I don't care about the bushes, just pave it." Sarah came out of the house. She was wearing a sundress and holding 2 glasses of wine. She handed one to Paul. He took it, drank half of it in one gulp, and then kissed her. It was a showy, possessive kiss. She laughed and pointed at the destruction. She said something I couldn't hear, but Paul laughed. They were erasing us. They were erasing Dad's legacy, Mom's memory, and my existence. They were turning the family home into a monument to Paul's ego. I took my phone out and snapped a few photos. The mud, the excavator, the wine. Enjoy it, I thought. Enjoy the wine, Paul. It's the most expensive glass you'll ever drink. I walked back to the car. My hands were shaking again, but not from weakness. I was shaking with anticipation. Friday morning. I was at the motel, ironing my only suit. It was a charcoal gray suit I had bought for a job interview 3 years ago. It was cheap, but it fit well enough. My phone buzzed. It was a text message, then another, then a notification from Facebook. I opened the group chat. It was the cousins and family group, a chat I had been muted in for years but never removed from. Paul had sent a digital flyer. It was animated. Gold fireworks exploded over a picture of the lake house. The Kingdom launch, celebrating the new head of the Harris family Saturday, 7:15 p.m. The lake house, out with the old, in with the bold. Come celebrate the future. Below the image, Paul had added a text message to the group. Everyone is welcome, even the strays. Come see what real success looks like. An open bar, live DJ, and a special announcement about the future of the company. Then a direct text came through to my phone from Paul. "Mark, Sarah thinks I should invite you. She feels bad about the car. Come by tomorrow. You can park on the street. I'll even let you have a beer on the house. Maybe you can learn something about how to close a deal. Don't wear scrubs." I stared at the screen. He wasn't inviting me because he wanted his brother there. He was inviting me because he needed an audience. A king isn't a king without a peasant to kneel before him. He wanted me to see Sarah on his arm. He wanted me to see the house he had stolen. He wanted to look at me and feel superior one last time. I typed a reply. "I'll be there, Paul. I wouldn't miss it." I hit send. Then I called Henderson. "Is it done?" I asked. "The judge just signed it." Henderson's voice was grim. "The ex parte injunction is active. The assets are frozen as of 4 p.m. today. The sheriff has the service papers." "Does Paul know?" "No. The bank won't notify him until a transaction is attempted and declined, or until Monday morning. As long as he doesn't try to wire $1 million tonight, he won't know until the sheriff hands him the order." "Perfect," I said. "Mark," Henderson said, pausing. The sheriff asked if he should bring a unit. "Tell him to bring 2, I said. "Paul doesn't like losing." I hung up the phone. I looked at the suit hanging on the back of the door. I looked at the box of sentimental effects in the corner. I walked over to the box. I opened it. Inside was an old fishing reel, a few books, and a picture of me and Dad. I placed the thick manila envelope from the genetics lab on top of the picture. Then I added the transparent slides I had made. I closed the box. Tomorrow, Paul wanted to talk about the future. I was going to give him a history lesson he would never forget. Saturday morning broke with a sky the color of a bruise. It was fitting. I spent the morning in the motel room, preparing. I didn't rush. I shaved carefully, clearing away the stubble of the last week. I showered until the hot water ran out. Then I dressed. The charcoal suit was the only one I owned. I had bought it at a department store outlet for a nursing administrator interview 3 years ago, a job I didn't get because I lacked the killer instinct, according to the feedback. I put on a crisp white shirt and polished my shoes with a towel from the bathroom. I looked in the mirror. I didn't look like a millionaire. I didn't look like an heir. I looked like exactly what they thought I was, a middle-aged man trying too hard to hold on to his dignity. But my eyes were different. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. There was only the cold, mechanical ticking of a plan set in motion. At noon, I packed the box, the sentimental effects box. It was a cardboard moving box I had salvaged from the dumpster behind the motel. Inside, I placed the items I was technically there to collect: an old tackle box, a photo album, and Dad's favorite pipe. Underneath the album, I placed the projector slides I had made at the copy shop. On top of everything, I placed the folded court order Henderson had given me. I taped the box shut. My phone rang. It was Sarah. I stared at the screen for a moment, watching her picture, a selfie of us from a vacation in happier times, flash on the glass. I answered. "Mark?" Her voice was breathless, loud. I could hear music thumping in the background and the sound of people shouting instructions. "Hello, Sarah," I said. "Listen, I just wanted to give you a heads up," she said, her tone shifting into that specific pitying register she had adopted recently. "Paul is, well, he's in a mood. A good mood, but intense. He's stressed about the launch. Everything has to be perfect." "I understand," I said. "So when you come tonight, just keep it low profile, okay?" She lowered her voice. "Don't bring up the money. Don't ask him for help with the motel bill in front of his investors. It just makes you look desperate, and it makes me look bad." "I'm not coming to ask for money, Sarah," I said. "I'm just coming to get my box, and to see the house one last time." "Okay, good." She sounded relieved. "I told security to let you park round the back, near the service entrance. It'll be easier for you to load your stuff without blocking the Ferraris. There's going to be a lot of press." "The service entrance," I repeated. "Thank you, Sarah. That's very thoughtful." "I'm trying to help you, Mark. Paul wanted to uninvite you, but I told him you needed closure. Just grab a drink, say congratulations, and go, okay?" "Okay," I said. "I'll be brief." I hung up. She thought she was being kind. She was arranging my humiliation so it would be convenient for her. I grabbed my keys and the box. I checked out of the motel. I wasn't coming back to room 114. I had one stop to make before the lake. I drove to a gravel lot behind the county fire station. A sheriff's cruiser was parked there, idling. Jim Miller rolled down the window. We had played varsity football together in high school. Jim was the defensive tackle. I was the bench warmer who taped ankles. But Jim had always liked me. He liked that I didn't brag. "You look like you're going to a funeral, Mark," Jim said, eyeing my suit. "Hopefully not," I said. I leaned on his doorframe. "Did Henderson call you?" Jim nodded, tapping a thick folder on his passenger seat. "Got the paperwork right here. Judge signed the injunction this morning. Freezing order, eviction notice, and a restraining order barring Paul Harris from dissipating assets." He looked at me, his expression serious. "This is a heavy swing, Mark. You're evicting your brother from his own party." "It's not his party," I said, "and it's not his house." "The DNA stuff." Jim shook his head. "Is it true? Paul isn't William's kid?" 0%, I said. Jim let out a low whistle. "Damn. Small town. This is going to be the only thing anyone talks about for 10 years. "I just need to know you're ready," I said. "I'm ready. I've got 2 deputies staging down the road at the turnoff. We're officially here for traffic control until you give the word." "Give me 30 minutes inside," I said. "I want him to make his speech. I want him to be on record claiming the estate." "Don't wait too long," Jim warned. "If things get heated, I'm coming in. I don't want a domestic disturbance call." "It won't be a disturbance," I promised. "It'll be a correction." I got back in my rental car and drove toward the lake. The sun was setting, casting long, bloody shadows across the road. When I arrived at the gate, the scene was unrecognizable. Paul had installed spotlight units that swept the sky like it was a Hollywood premiere. A massive banner hung over the iron gates. "Harris Capital, the new era." There was a line of cars waiting to get in. Porsches, Maseratis, sleek black limousines. I sat in my dented Ford Focus, idling behind a convertible filled with laughing 20-somethings. When I rolled up to the security checkpoint, the guard, a different one this time, a hired bouncer with a headset, looked at my car with open disdain. "Valet is full," he grunted. "You a vendor? Caterer?" "No," I said. "I'm family." He checked his clipboard. He scanned down the list of VIPs. He flipped the page. He flipped another page. "Name?" "Mark Harris." He found it at the very bottom of the last page, scribbled in pen. Right, he said. The brother. Look, you can't park in the main circle. Boss doesn't want clutter in the photos. Go around the side, park by the dumpsters behind the garage. Understood, I said. The gate buzzed open. I drove up the winding driveway. The house was lit up like a Christmas tree. Colored lights washed the stone facade in purple and gold. The bass from the music was so loud it rattled my dashboard. I parked by the dumpsters, exactly where I was told. I took the cardboard box from the passenger seat. I walked toward the back patio. The party was in full swing. There must have been 200 people there. I recognized some of them, old business partners of my father, neighbors, people I had known my whole life. But mostly, it was strangers. Beautiful, young, rich strangers drinking champagne and laughing. They had transformed the boathouse deck into a stage. A massive screen was set up behind a DJ booth. I walked through the crowd. I felt invisible again. People glanced at me, saw the cheap suit and the cardboard box, and looked away. They probably thought I was help, or a delivery guy. Mark. I turned. It was a cousin of ours, distinct by his red tie. He looked embarrassed to see me. Hey, man, he said, not offering his hand. Didn't think you'd show up. Just getting my things, I said, lifting the box slightly. Right. He shifted his weight. Look, he's really doing it, huh? The helipad plans look insane. Insane is the word, I agreed. I pushed past him. I needed to find a spot near the front. Then I saw him. Paul was standing near the bar, holding court. He looked like a king. He was wearing a tuxedo that probably cost more than my rental car. He had a cigar in one hand and a glass of scotch in the other. Sarah was clinging to his arm, looking radiant in a silver dress, laughing at everything he said. He spotted me. His eyes narrowed, then he grinned. It wasn't a friendly grin. It was the grin of a man who sees a prop he can use. He waved me over. The crowd parted. Everyone, Paul shouted over the music. Look who made it, the prodigal twin. The music dipped slightly. People turned to stare. I walked up to him. I stood 5 feet away, clutching my box. Marky, Paul said, slapping my shoulder. He smelled of expensive cologne and scotch. Glad you came, really. It shows character to show up when you've lost. Hello, Paul, I said. House looks different. It looks like success, Paul corrected. He gestured to the crowd. Dad was a great man, but he thought small. He sat on this money. I'm going to make it work. I'm going to build an empire. He looked down at the cardboard box in my hands. Is that it? He asked, pointing with his cigar. The loot? Just the essentials, I said. Let's see, Paul said, reaching for the flap. What did Dad leave you? His old fishing lures? Some dusty books? He laughed, inviting the crowd to join in. A few sycophants chuckled nervously. You know, I almost feel bad, Paul said, his voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that was meant to be overheard. It must be hard, knowing that they looked at us both, same face, same birthday, and decided I was the one worth betting on. But hey, someone has to be the safety net, right? Sarah squeezed his arm. Paul, be nice. I am being nice, Paul said. I'm letting him drink my scotch. He turned back to me. Go put your box in your car, Mark. Then come back. I'm making a speech in 10 minutes. I want you to hear it. It's about genetics, about how greatness is in the blood. I felt the phone in my pocket vibrate. It was a text from Jim, in position at the gate. Say the word. I looked at Paul. I looked at Sarah. I looked at the crowd of people drinking my father's wine and standing on my land. I'll be right here, Paul, I said softly. I wouldn't miss your speech for the world. Good man, Paul said. He turned his back on me to high-five an investor. I stepped back into the shadows of the deck. I found a spot near the AV booth where the cables for the projector ran into the main console. The DJ, a kid with headphones around his neck, was busy mixing the next track. I set the box down on a table. I carefully peeled the tape back. I took out the court order and slid it into my inside jacket pocket. Then I took out the transparency slides. I checked the time. 7:55 p.m. Paul walked up onto the stage. The music cut out. A spotlight hit him. He raised his arms, soaking in the applause. Thank you, he bellowed. Thank you all for coming to the christening of the Harris dynasty. The crowd cheered. I took a deep breath. My pulse was slow, steady. I picked up the slides. It was time to introduce them to the real Harris dynasty. Paul's voice boomed through the speakers, echoing off the dark water of the lake. You see, he said, gesturing to the giant screen behind him, which displayed a looping video of the Harris family crest. Greatness isn't learned. It's inherited. It's in the DNA. My father built this company with iron will, and that iron runs through my veins. You can't fake biology." The crowd applauded politely. Sarah clapped the hardest, beaming up at him from the front row. "Some people," Paul continued, his eyes scanning the crowd until they found me in the shadows, "are born to follow. Some are born to lead. It's just nature. It's the blood." I walked out of the shadows. I didn't rush. I walked up the stairs to the stage with the heavy, rhythmic step of a man who knows exactly where he is going. Paul saw me coming. He smiled, thinking I was coming to pay homage. He lowered the mic. "And here he is, my brother. Come to wish us well, Mark." I reached the podium. I didn't look at Paul. I looked at the AV technician, a young guy in a hoodie. I placed a USB drive on his console. "Paul wants the medical slides up," I said calmly, "for the finale." The kid shrugged and plugged it in. I took the microphone from Paul's hand. He was so surprised he let it go without a fight. "You're right, Paul," I said. My voice was amplified, crisp and clear, cutting through the murmurs of the crowd. "Blood tells. That's what Dad always said." "Mark, what are you doing?" Paul hissed, stepping closer. "Get off the stage. You're drunk." "I'm not drunk," I said. "I'm just correcting the record." I pointed to the massive screen behind us. The family crest vanished. In its place, the high-definition scan of the National Genetics Registry report appeared. It was 10 feet tall. The red and blue bars were impossible to miss. "This is a DNA analysis from 1989, I told the crowd. The murmuring stopped. The silence was sudden and heavy. "It compares the genetic markers of myself and Paul against our parents." "Turn it off!" Paul shouted at the sound guy. "Cut the feed!" "The column on the left is me," I continued, ignoring him. "A 99.9% match to William and Judith Harris. The column on the right is Paul." I looked at the crowd. I saw Mr. Henderson standing near the back, nodding slowly. "Paul matches our mother," I said, "but he shares 0% of his DNA with William Harris." A gasp rippled through the audience. It wasn't theatrical. It was the genuine shock of 200 people realizing they were witnessing a catastrophe. Paul stared at the screen. His face went slack. That's fake. That's a lie." "It's called heteropaternal superfecundation," I explained, my voice level, like I was giving a shift report at the hospital. "Fraternal twins with different fathers. It's rare. But numbers don't lie, Paul. You aren't the heir. You're the half-brother." "Security," Paul screamed, his voice cracking. "Get him out of here." 2 large men in black suits started toward the stage. "I wouldn't do that," I said into the mic. From the darkness of the lawn, flashing blue lights erupted. The wail of a siren cut through the air. Sheriff Jim Miller walked up the center aisle, flanked by 2 deputies. He wasn't smiling. He walked straight to the stage stairs. He held up a thick sheaf of papers bound in blue. "Paul," Jim said, his voice carrying without a microphone, "I need you to step down." "Jim?" Paul looked confused, desperate. "Jim, arrest him. He's trespassing. He's slandering me." "This is a court order signed by Judge Miller this morning," Jim said, climbing the steps. He handed the papers to Paul. "It's an emergency injunction based on the terms of the Harris Family Trust. The trust explicitly limits beneficiaries to the biological issue of William Harris. Since you are not his biological son, you have no legal claim to this property, the accounts, or the company." Paul dropped the papers. They scattered across the stage floor. "This is my house," Paul shrieked. He looked at Sarah. "Sarah, tell them. Tell them this is insane." I looked down at Sarah. She had taken a step back, then another. She wasn't looking at Paul. She was looking at the DNA chart on the screen, doing the math in her head. She looked at me, her eyes wide with a dawning horror. She realized she had bet on the wrong horse, and the race was already over. "It's not your house, Paul," I said gently. "It never was. You're evicted, effective immediately." Jim placed a hand on Paul's shoulder. "I need to escort you off the premises, son. We need to secure the assets for the trustee." "I'm not leaving," Paul shouted. He tried to shove Jim. It was over in a second. Jim spun him around, forced his hands behind his back, and clicked the handcuffs on. It wasn't violent, just efficient. "You're under arrest for trespassing and resisting," Jim said. "Let's go." As they marched Paul down the stairs, he looked back at me. The arrogance was gone. The alpha mask had crumbled, revealing the frightened, spoiled child underneath. He looked small. "Mark," he pleaded. "Mark, fix this. We're brothers." I looked at him. I felt a pang of pity, but it was distant, like watching a stranger cry in a movie. "We're half-brothers, Paul," I said into the mic, "and I think you have a phone call to make. I'd suggest calling a lawyer, but Mr. Henderson works for me now." The deputies guided him through the parting crowd. No one made eye contact with him. The friends, the investors, the sycophants, they all stepped back, creating a wide berth, terrified of being associated with the failure. Sarah stood alone near the stage. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes. She opened her mouth to speak, maybe to say my name, maybe to apologize. I turned away from her. I walked over to the AV kid. "Kill the music," I said, "and kill the lights." The kid nodded, terrified. He flipped a master switch. The giant screen went black. The purple and gold floodlights died. The thumping bass cut out instantly. The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the wind in the trees and the distant crunch of gravel as the squad car drove away with my brother in the back seat. I stood alone on the dark deck of my father's house. I didn't cheer. I didn't celebrate. I just took a deep breath of the cool night air. It smelled of the lake and damp earth and clean, quiet victory. I picked up my cardboard box. I walked down the stairs, past the stunned guests who were already whispering and reaching for their car keys. I didn't stop to talk to any of them. I had a lot of work to do on Monday, but for tonight, I was going to go inside, make a pot of coffee, and sit in my father's chair. Finally, the house was quiet.